Hello everyone. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be taking a look at how to play Mongoose's Victory at Sea Naval Miniatures game. To do so, I've got the book itself. It's printed over here on my left. You can't see that. They'll be over in that direction. And we also have all the necessary tools laid out on this little tiny table that I've constructed intentionally for this purpose. So for our example, we're going to run you through how initiative is done, how movement is handled, how you do damage, how you do attacks, how you do torpedoes, and all those other kind of things. I'm going to keep this example relatively simple. I'll probably do a more complicated battle a little later on, but for now, let's keep things simple. So Victory at Sea is a game that came from Mongoose. It was published a little while ago. It's going almost 10-15 years at this particular point. My understanding is at some point there is going to be another edition. I believe if you go in the forum as of today, this would be June of 2018, you can actually find kind of like a preset. For those of you who'd like to get a handle on these rules, you can find it printed in some places, or you can go in the Wargame Vault to try to locate a copy. There's a World War II version, World War I version, a couple of the secondary rules too. For today though, we're going to be focusing only on the primary version. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. First things first, in every single one of these battles, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go ahead and get yourself a little sheet of information for each of the different combatants you have in a particular battle. You can hear me flipping through some pages real quick, so I'll go ahead and I'll pull out exactly what that looks like so that you can see what it looks like. Something kind of like this. You know, this is just me pulling out of a page. This particular example is from Deutschland class pocket battleship up in here, like the Graf Spee and stuff like that. On that little sheet of paper, what I actually like to do is to go onto MS Paint and go through everything and actually find what I want and then just kind of make like a hodgepodge, Mod Podge, kind of whatever you want to call it, character sheet almost for each one of the individual ships I'm working with. But in this case, you'll just have to use your imagination. So anyway, I've gone ahead and got myself a couple miniature models. People looking at my miniatures will observe the fact that that's roughly a Liberty ship, and this is most certainly not the Atlantic-class cruiser, which I'm claiming it's going to actually be. Which, you know, exactly. And speaking of scale, by the way, real quick, other games, scale is a much, much bigger deal, both in how long it takes to execute a turn, as well as the actual distances involved. You can read more about that in the actual intro chart. But onto the game as it is. First thing you need to do for each game is you need to roll initiative for each round. The person who controls initiative gets to decide who moves. They also get to shoot first. They also get to do damage control first, things along those lines. So to do this real simple, you're just going to grab a 2d6 like this, and you're going to roll for each side. Now, taking a look over on this side, it looks like our civilian vessel, again, looks like they got an 8. Coming over here on this side, it looks like they scored a 4. There's a couple complications here. First off, since this particular team, again, we're just using this as an example, has one civilian vehicle, you have to subtract 1 from the initiative roll. But since it's only made up of civilian ships, you have to subtract a total of 2, giving this a roll of 7, which still technically beats our cruiser over here on the left that only had a 4. But for example, we're going to go ahead and do something like this. Let's say he rolled a 2. If you have a float plane active, again, airplanes is for another day, another discussion, you would actually add 1 to this roll. But anyway, let's go ahead and get going. So the person who has initiative decides who gets to move first. Now, generally, as I like to think of it, I like to always have the other guy move first so I can react to him. You don't want to do this if you're in a situation where you have more ships than the other guy. You'll see why in a second. So moving is super duper straightforward. Taking a look at our little character sheet over here, I can see that we have a movement on this particular ship of 7 inches. But like I said, since I want initiative, I'm going to make him go first. Movement's super simple. You're just going to bust out your handy dandy tape measure or ruler, go ahead and hold it up to the distance, and then move it a number of inches. There's no acceleration or deceleration in this particular game. So we're going to move him forward a total of 1 inch, which is his maximum speed. Now, if you were using a special command to go flank, you could actually up that to 2 inches, but in this case, we're going to leave that alone. This guy on the flip side has a movement of 7 with flank speed with the special command. He could go, let's see, half of 7 is 3.5, round up. He could actually go 11 inches, which is an enormous distance for this little guy in our little universe here. So what we're actually going to do is not only move him, but we're actually going to turn him. Now, when you turn in this game, you require one of these handy-dandy little turn templates like I have right here. It's better to get a laminated one so it survives more than 1 or 2 encounters, but this works pretty well for what it is. So in order to move a ship, you can only move it one of these notches based on what its move score is. Some ships have what they call agile, which means they can actually move more than once in a given turn. Regardless of what you're actually going to pick, you have to make sure you move at least half of your distance, your move that is, in order to go ahead and execute a move. So in this case, since this guy's move is 7, half of his move is 3.5, we'll round that up to 4. This ship has a special trait in it that gives it the ability to turn 2 points. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and take out my handy dandy tape measure again, measure this up. We're going to go half of our distance. Now we go ahead and place this guy down, get this out of our way. You can go ahead and place it on top. Again, OCD people are going to be very annoyed at what I just did, but that's okay. And now we can move it up to 2 points. 1, 2 points. Remember though, we still have 3 inches of movement left. So in this particular case, we're going to go ahead and cross this T. We're going to go ahead and cross this T where we're at it as well. And we have completed move. That's all there is to moving. When you're dealing with things such as submarines and airplanes, this gets a little bit more complicated. By the way, if he had another ship, let's say a little Fletcher-class destroyer like this, he would then go ahead and move it because I nominated him to go first. When you're in a situation where the other side is something like 3 ships and you've only got 1 ship, you've got to decide how you want to break that apart. As a general rule, the people with the more ships should have the advantage here because of the fact that there's more of them, they get to react better than the other single ship guy. We'll pull those guys out for now. Alright, now we move on to the attack phase. Now the attack phase is very, very straightforward in the system, which I think is one of the greatest qualities of Victory at Sea. To attack, we simply take a unit, by the way, no pre-measuring, and we go ahead and decide what we're going to attack with and who we're going to attack. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and pretend as if we did cross this guy's T like this. And we're going to pretend we're attacking him with all of our batteries. Taking a look at our character sheet, or our ship sheet here, indicates that we have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 individual turrets that are all triples, and they all have 6-inch guns on them. For each one of those turrets, we get a single attack dice. Now in this particular case, since we have 5 turrets, each with a single attack dice, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we get to roll 6d6. By the way, damage and attacks are not simultaneously in this game, which means whoever attacks first is the one who gets to do the real damage first. So here we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and roll these 6 dice. Again, 1 for each one of my battery. Before I do this though, it's probably a good idea to measure range. When you're measuring range, everybody has kind of a different opinion on how to do it. In this system, I'm kind of a fan of measuring from usually the foremast to the foremast, or in my particular case, the flying bridge to the flying bridge, because it's nice and visible, giving us a range of about 5.5 inches. Taking a look on our chart, 5.5 is less than 27, now we can attack. All right, let's do it. Okay, so we rolled 2 6s, a 4, a 3, and a 2. What does that actually mean for us? Well, it depends on what the target score is. Since this guy's a Liberty ship, his target score is a 4. So that means any one of these rolls that is a 4 or greater can go ahead and count as a hit. Now let's mix things up a little bit. Let's say, for example, we were in this scenario instead. Now this is cool because if we have the broadside, the beam of the ship, and we're attacking, we actually get to add 1 to this die. So this would be a 7, and this would, I'm sorry, it would go the other way around. This would be a 5, this would be a, no, I was right the first time. So basically you're reducing the target score by 1. So if this guy was a 4, now you need a 3 or greater. If you remember a minute ago, this guy was also a 3. So if I were attacking the guy's beam, that would mean I actually got 4 hits. So what do I do with these hits? Well, we go ahead and take the dice, and then we look at the armor score of the target, which in this case is a 2 up, and then we go ahead and roll the dice. In this case, it looks like there are a total of 3 hits. Now, one thing that you have to watch out for, and this is kind of a big deal, are there any special traits on the weapons of the ship that you're firing from? In this particular case, taking a quick look, I can see the fact that he has a special called AP. AP simply means that you have to go ahead and subtract 1 from these rolls, or I should say subtract 1 from your target number. That would mean that 1, 2, 3, 4 of those would actually cause damage. That's some serious hit. So how do we do damage now? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. This would be 4 damage to this particular vehicle, this particular ship. Again, this is a Victory ship. It's got 7 hit points there. So this would drop it down to 3 hit points. Now, what happens if you roll a 6? A 6 automatically counts as a successful damage. In this particular case, it'd be 1 damage, but it also means you have the possibility of a critical hit. Check for a critical hit, roll the dice, and if you get a 4 or greater, that would indicate that the critical hit is a success. In this case, I rolled a 6, so we're good to go. So what does a critical hit do? How do you evaluate a critical hit? It's actually pretty easy. You take 2 dice 6, go ahead and roll it, and then you look at the critical hit chart. In this case, we got a 6 and a 4, that's a 10. Looking at the critical hit chart, that is a weapons hit. But taking a look at the weapons, then we go ahead and roll a d6. And it says a 3. So based on the weapons 3, that would say secondary weapons are damaged. That would also add 2 to the total damage, which would bring our 4 damage up to 6 damage, which actually puts the ship into the cripple category. We'll talk about that in a second. It also does, let's see here, all secondary weapons lose a single attack die. If he were out of secondary weapons, he'd be out of business, which would be in a lot of trouble. But the point is, he's pretty badly hurt. Speaking of damage, you have a state called crippled. If the ship gets smaller than the crippled, I should say the damage on the ship gets less than the crippled score on the particular ship, that would mean that your turning will be reduced by 1 point, speed gets reduced in half. Also, the attack dice of the ship's secondary and anti-aircraft weapons get halved, and you're supposed to round that down also. What you're also supposed to do is you're supposed to roll a dice for each main gun, and in the event that it does not roll a 4 or a 3 or less, that damage, that gun is permanently destroyed. It's also the trait that it is permanently destroyed. So for example, if he had radar and he were to be crippled like he was, if I roll a 3 or less, his radar survives. In this case it does, but let's say I roll a 5, that would mean his radar is completely destroyed as well. So crippled ship, it's not out of the fight completely, but sometimes if you roll bad, it's not going to end well. Alright. The other option, too, is you have what they call crew hits, which could result in a skeleton crew. That is another number marked after the slash under crew for a specific vessel. If the event that you get to that, you get a -2 to damage control checks and things along those lines. So anyway, let's pretend for a second that we did get a critical hit on this guy. But let's say that we actually got a crew hit that started a fire. Now, some people like to use little fire things to actually designate that it's on fire. I think that's great. I like to write it down in a little kind of ship log and things like that. If you have a fire, that's going to cause an extra crew hit. In this case, if it was a class 1 fire on the critical crew chart, that would mean that we'd also lose the entire crew, because we only have a crew in this particular case. But let's pretend that it's okay. After you've gone ahead and done volleys of everything, you're in pretty good shape. Oh, I forgot to say, what about torpedoes? Well, before we say torpedoes, let's talk about secondary armament. Most ships have what they call secondary armament. The big difference between primary and secondary, other than, caliber and damage, is the fact that primary guns can only attack in the arc that they are mounted in. A secondary gun can theoretically aim in any direction as long as it is in range. So in our particular case, we actually do have secondary armament. We have 2 attack dice for the secondary armament. So again, going for a 4 up, there's let's see, an AP bonus. No, but we have a weak penalty, which means when we attack, it becomes a 3 up to damage. In this case, we connected, but it didn't actually do any extra damage. So secondary armament is great because you can aim in every direction. Finally, let's say we want to do a torpedo attack. Torpedo attacks are pretty easy. We're going to take this cruiser out of commission for just a minute and go and grab a ship that is capable of doing a torpedo attack. In this case, we have a handy-dandy Fletcher-class destroyer. Torpedo attacks require you to be in the correct arc for the particular attack. In this case, this is a perfect example of a torpedo attack. There's no special bonuses except for attacking the beam versus attacking like the bow or the stern of the ship. So in this case, when you're doing a torpedo attack, usually you declare these and do them after everything else has happened. So borrowing a token from a different game, imagine this is the word torpedo, I'm going to go ahead and mount that on the bow. By the way, on a Fletcher, the torpedo's range is 10. Let's see, so that's 3 inches. We don't have a problem at all, so we're completely in range. So let's do everything, we do our shooting, things along those lines. Now it's time to see what actually happened as a result. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at this. He gets 5 attack die for torpedoes, and we are in range. Since we're getting a beam, we get to go ahead and actually add to that score as well. In this particular case, the target number, which would normally be a 4, goes down to a 3. So we're going to take 5 dice, and we need 3s. Wait and you see the best part. So in this particular case, we do 1, 2, 3, 4 individual hits. Now, normally it's like, well, that's quite a bit. What's the attack dice look? Well, the attack dice on these particular torpedoes is 5 per hit. That would mean I have to roll this 4 times. Let's see how much damage we do. Remember, it's an armor score of 2 up. So that's 4 damage. Second torpedo, that's another 4 damage. He's completely destroyed. The other thing you want to worth taking a look too was we had 2 critical hits. Rolling that right here, we had 1 confirmed critical hit. Just going through with the example, if I wanted to, let's assume we survive the rest of the torpedo. That's a critical hit zone 5. That's a crew hit. The actual hit itself is a 2, which means we have multiple fires, which means we roll a d6. We started 1 fire. So at the end of the day, this ship probably would not have survived that first torpedo, but it's worth it just to see it. Okay, so what happens? You've done all your shooting, you've done all your engagements, you've done all your torpedoes. Now it comes time to go ahead and get to the end phase. At the end phase, we can do damage control. Damage control in this system is relatively simple. What you do is you simply take one effect the ship is suffering from. In this particular case, if you remember from before, we had some damage to one of its secondary weapons, and then you roll a d6 plus the command score. Command score is decided at the beginning of the battle. It can range again between a 1, meaning you're terrible crew, to a 6, meaning you're legends. So we'll go ahead and take this dice. This is for this guy from earlier from our cruiser example. He has a command score of, let's say, 3. His crew knows what a ship is and know how to run the thing, but they're not exactly experienced at putting out fires and fixing damage to secondary armament. So that's a 3, and a 3 is a 6. You have to roll at least a 9 in order to fix that damage. Now, let's say he's still on fire from before too. Again, we're just carrying on with this different example. So if he has a fire, you have to roll a d6 again per fire. And also remember that you need to go ahead and, let's take a look real quick. You need a score of 7 or more. So if you remember, this guy is a 6. He gets a 6, so he actually extinguished the fire, so he's good to go. Now you have to do this per fire. So obviously fire can be very, very dangerous. Now, let's make things a little more complicated. Let's say that he failed that roll to put out that fire. Let's say he got a 1 or something along those lines. If that's the case, then he would lose 2 crew each turn that fire is raging. So that would mean that this ship with a crew of 2 would lose its crew even if the original hit that started the fire didn't completely destroy the crew. Obviously with bigger ships, this is a different story, but I wanted to keep things simple. Now, what else can you do in this game? You can do these things called special actions. Special actions are pretty cool. They basically allow you to do things like lay smoke. They allow you to increase your speed. They allow you to take an extra turn. They allow you to go a little bit faster. To do a special action is really, really, really simple. All you have to do is go ahead and grab your 6-sided dice and then add your command score to its result. In this case, let's say the Fletcher wants to go flank speed. His result was a 5. So the requirement to go flank speed, also known as, let's see here, flank speed, it's an automatic command check. I apologize. So you can actually just go if you wanted to. Speaking of which, we'll see that issue in a second. But let's say that we wanted him to go ahead and do all hands on deck to make his damage control a little bit simpler. His 5 plus his score of 4 would equal 9, which would mean he'd be able to, during the next turn, to actually increase his damage control, which is kind of handy. Okay, let's talk about other modifiers. Let's say, for example here, that our 2 ships are 20 inches apart. Obviously, in this particular case, taking a quick look, you can see they're about 6 inches apart. But again, I don't have the world's biggest table, so you'll have to deal with this. So let's say they're 20 inches apart. In this particular case, when you're doing gun attacks, you have to add 1. So normally, if you remember, his target is going to be a 4 in order to hit. But if we were at 20 inches, this would go up to a 5 to hit with the attack dice. The problem is, since he's still beaming the guy, it means that it's still only a 4. Let's say we moved him out a little bit further, and now the distance is a total of 20 inches. At 20 inches, you subtract 2, or you add 2 to the target score, in which case this guy becomes a 6, minus 1, which makes him, again, minus 1, because, again, he's beaming him right here, which would mean for him to hit at this range, keep in mind this destroyer can't actually hit at 20 inches. Let's get something that can. The Bismarck, that'll do the trick. Keep in mind now, you have to subtract 2. If you have the radar trait, you are allowed to add 1 to that. So instead of minus 2 at extreme range, it becomes a minus 1. At long range, it just goes straight to 0. Speaking of long range, this is the Bismarck, obviously. He's going to have quite a bit of firepower against this wheezy little victory ship over here. Let's say that you're going to go ahead and roll damage. Whenever you are at any range greater than 20 inches, you add 1 to the damage dice. So you end up with some sort of interesting situations. For example, this guy is a 2, if you guys remember, for his armor score. At long range, the armor score would drop to a 1, which means any hit basically is going to cause penetration, which is going to cause some severe damage. Now, the Bismarck has a nice quirk where he has AP shells, which actually subtracts 1 again, which would be 0. So again, pretty much you still have to roll, but you can see exactly what happens. Obviously, if a ship's damage score is reduced to 0, it is completely destroyed and is going to be removed. By the way, on main guns, you can only attack one thing at a time. You're not really supposed to be splitting fire with your main guns. Secondary and anti-aircraft weapons can split their fire, which is, you know, it's interesting to say the least. Some ships also have things like depth charges, but that's something we'll deal with another day. That is the basics of Victory at Sea for Mongoose. Hopefully I'll show you a couple different cool little modes, such as using ships and stuff like that. Oh, speaking of miniatures and stuff like that, these miniatures are just kind of 3D printed random, hence my crazy scales. Victory at Sea comes with these really, really nice little things at the end of the book. I'll go ahead and tilt it so you guys can see it, that you can actually print. I mounted mine to some basswood like this to make them nice and easy to kind of hang on to. These are pretty cool, and it's kind of like a nice little added bonus that you can get if you don't actually have minis at home. So that's the basic gist. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comments below. I will try to do this again with slightly more advanced rules, bringing submarines, airplanes, things along like that. This is a pretty cool game, and I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't done so. If you're new to naval miniatures, this is probably a really, really good place to start because it's simple. Yeah, it's not quite as complicated as some of the other games, but on the flip side, I think it's still pretty much worth it to go ahead and give a spin. So, enjoy, and like I said, if I got something wrong, just give me a heads up and hopefully I'll put a little annotation in there to let you know in the video. Cheers!